Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we're pulling back the curtain on 3 stories that reveal how power really operates, from the highest courts in America and China to the invisible physics of our own planet's magnetic field.
I'm Maya Clarity, and what connects tonight's stories is a single thread: systems of control. Whether it's a president searching for legal loopholes to maintain economic leverage, a government trying to restore faith in markets riddled with corruption, or scientists finally decoding how electromagnetic waves amplify in Earth's radiation belts, tonight is about understanding the mechanisms that shape our world.
We start in Washington, where the Supreme Court just delivered what many are calling the most significant legal rebuke of the Trump presidency. The court blocked the president from using emergency powers to unilaterally impose sweeping tariffs. But here's the thing, Maya. That's only half the story.
That's right, Alex. Because while the headlines celebrated a check on executive power, the legal reality is far more complicated. The president still has cards to play, and the trade war is far from over. We'll break down exactly what those cards are and what they mean for every American consumer.
Then we go to Beijing, where China's Supreme People's Court is taking the extraordinary step of encouraging retail investors to sue corrupt listed companies. On the surface, it sounds like a win for the little guy. But dig deeper, and you'll find a government desperate to prop up equity markets after a bruising period of economic uncertainty. And finally, we'll take you to the frontier of space physics, where researchers have cracked a decades-old mystery about chorus waves in Earth's magnetosphere. Stay with us. This is Truth Report.
Let's get right into our lead story. The United States Supreme Court, in a decision that sent shockwaves through global markets, struck down President Trump's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, known as IEEPA, as a basis for imposing broad tariffs on trading partners. According to reporting from the South China Morning Post, this represents Trump's most consequential legal setback on his economic agenda.
And to understand why this matters, you have to understand what IEEPA actually is. This law was enacted in 1977, during the Carter administration, and it gives the president sweeping authority to regulate economic transactions after declaring a national emergency. It was designed for genuine crises, think frozen assets during the Iran hostage situation, sanctions against regimes committing atrocities. It was never intended as a tool for routine trade policy.
That's the critical context here, Alex. The Trump administration took a law designed for extraordinary circumstances and attempted to stretch it into a blanket authority for restructuring America's entire trade relationship with the world. The Supreme Court essentially said no, that's not what this law was written to do. You cannot declare trade deficits a national emergency and then use emergency powers to impose tariffs at will.
But here's where it gets interesting, and this is the part most outlets are missing. According to the South China Morning Post's analysis, Trump still has significant legal cards in his hand. The Supreme Court ruling was narrow. It addressed IEEPA specifically. It did not strip the executive branch of all tariff authority. And that distinction matters enormously.
It matters because the United States has a patchwork of trade laws that grant the president various degrees of authority over tariffs. Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974 allows the president to impose tariffs in response to unfair trade practices by foreign governments. Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 permits tariffs on national security grounds. These are separate legal authorities that were not touched by the Supreme Court's ruling.
So what we're really looking at is not the end of Trump's tariff agenda, but a forced pivot. The administration will almost certainly shift its legal justification from IEEPA to these other statutes. And that pivot carries its own risks and implications. Section 301 investigations take time. They require the United States Trade Representative to conduct formal reviews. Section 232 requires a finding from the Department of Commerce that imports threaten national security. These aren't overnight processes.
And that delay is itself a weapon, Alex. Because the uncertainty alone is devastating for businesses trying to plan supply chains, for manufacturers trying to price goods, for farmers trying to decide what to plant. The tariff threat doesn't need to be implemented to cause economic damage. The mere possibility, the legal ambiguity, the shifting justifications, all of that creates a fog that chills investment and disrupts markets.
Let's talk about who actually benefits from this arrangement. Because it's not the American consumer. Every serious economic analysis shows that tariffs function as a tax on domestic consumers and businesses. When you put a 25% tariff on imported steel, American manufacturers who use steel pay more. Those costs get passed down the chain to the person buying a car, a refrigerator, a bridge. The tariff doesn't come out of China's pocket. It comes out of yours.
And this is where the investigative lens has to sharpen. The political argument for tariffs is about protecting American jobs and punishing unfair trade practices. But the economic reality is that tariffs create winners and losers within the domestic economy. The winners are the specific industries shielded from foreign competition, domestic steel producers, for example. The losers are everyone else who depends on affordable inputs. And those losers vastly outnumber the winners.
What the Supreme Court ruling actually exposed is a deeper constitutional question that has been brewing for decades. How much unilateral economic power should any single president wield? The framers of the Constitution gave the power to regulate commerce to Congress, not the executive. Over time, Congress delegated more and more of that authority to the president through laws like IEEPA and Section 301. This ruling is the court saying there are limits to that delegation.
And the political implications are enormous. If the administration pivots to Section 232, expect legal challenges arguing that routine trade disputes don't constitute national security threats. If they go the Section 301 route, expect challenges on procedural grounds, whether the proper investigations were conducted, whether affected parties got due process. The legal battlefield has shifted, but the war over executive trade authority is far from over.
The bigger picture here, and this connects to our next story, is that we're living in an era where governments around the world are using economic tools as instruments of geopolitical power. Tariffs, sanctions, market interventions, these aren't just economic policies anymore. They're weapons in a broader struggle over global influence. And the legal frameworks governing these weapons were built for a different era.
That's the thread to hold on to as we move to our second story tonight, which takes us to Beijing and a very different kind of government intervention in markets. China's Supreme People's Court, the highest judicial body on the mainland, has announced a dramatic push to encourage equity investors to pursue representative legal action against corrupt listed and delisted firms. This comes as Chinese equity markets resumed trading after a 10-day break.
Let's set the scene here, because context is everything. China's stock markets have been through a punishing period. The CSI 300 index, which tracks the largest companies listed in Shanghai and Shenzhen, suffered significant declines over the past 2 years. Investor confidence has been battered by a property sector crisis, regulatory crackdowns on technology companies, slowing economic growth, and persistent concerns about corporate governance.
According to the South China Morning Post's reporting, the Supreme People's Court announced at a press conference that it would issue additional edicts on civil compensation for insider trading and market manipulation. The explicit goal is to better safeguard retail investors' interests. And that word, retail, is critical here. China's stock market is dominated by individual retail investors to a degree that is unusual compared to Western markets, where institutional investors like pension funds and mutual funds do most of the trading.
There are an estimated 200 million retail brokerage accounts in China. Many of these belong to ordinary citizens who have put their savings into the stock market in the absence of other attractive investment options. When corporate fraud occurs, when executives engage in insider trading or companies cook their books, it's these ordinary people who bear the brunt of the losses. So on its face, encouraging lawsuits against corrupt firms sounds like justice.
But let's apply the investigative lens. Why now? Why is the Supreme People's Court making this announcement precisely as markets reopen after a holiday break? The timing is not coincidental. Beijing is engaged in a calculated effort to restore confidence in equity markets. The government wants people to invest in stocks. It wants capital flowing into companies. It wants a vibrant market that supports economic growth and innovation.
And here's the tension. China's legal system operates under the authority of the Chinese Communist Party. The judiciary is not independent in the way Western courts are. So when the Supreme People's Court announces it will support investor lawsuits, the question is whether this represents genuine rule of law or whether it's a managed signal designed to create the appearance of investor protection without fundamentally changing the power dynamics.
That's the key question, Alex. Representative actions, what we might call class action lawsuits in the American context, are a relatively new legal tool in China. The securities law was amended in 2020 to allow investor protection agencies to bring representative lawsuits on behalf of harmed investors. But the number of such cases actually filed has been extremely small. The legal infrastructure exists on paper, but the practical barriers remain significant.
Think about what it takes for a retail investor in China to sue a listed company. You need evidence of fraud, which is hard to obtain when corporate disclosure standards are weaker than in Western markets. You need lawyers willing to take the case, in a system where the government can and does pressure legal professionals. You need a court system willing to rule against companies that may have powerful political connections. Every step of that process is fraught with obstacles.
So what the Supreme People's Court announcement really represents is Beijing trying to thread an incredibly difficult needle. It wants to signal that markets are safe for investors, that there are consequences for fraud, that the government is on the side of the little guy. But it doesn't want to unleash a wave of litigation that could destabilize markets, embarrass politically connected firms, or create precedents that limit the party's own flexibility.
And look at the broader pattern here. This announcement comes alongside the equity markets rally that the Post reported on. Beijing has been deploying a range of tools to support stock prices. State-backed funds have been buying shares. Regulators have restricted short selling. Now the judiciary is being brought in to boost confidence. It's a coordinated campaign, and the courts are playing a role that goes beyond pure justice.
The parallels to what we discussed in our first story are striking. In both the United States and China, we're seeing the judiciary become a central arena for economic policy battles. In America, the Supreme Court is checking executive overreach on tariffs. In China, the Supreme People's Court is being deployed as a tool to manage market confidence. In both cases, the law is being shaped by economic imperatives as much as by legal principles.
And there's a deeper irony here. China is encouraging lawsuits against corporate fraud to boost market confidence, while simultaneously maintaining a system where genuine judicial independence doesn't exist. The United States just saw its highest court check presidential power on trade, while the president retains multiple alternative legal pathways to pursue the same policy. In both systems, the appearance of legal constraint coexists with substantial executive flexibility.
For investors, whether in Shanghai or New York, the lesson is the same. Legal frameworks matter, but they exist within political realities. And those political realities can shift fast. The Chinese investor cheering today's announcement should remember that the same legal system was used to crack down on tech companies 2 years ago. The American business owner relieved by the Supreme Court ruling should remember that tariffs can return under a different legal heading.
Now let's take a sharp turn, and I mean that literally, into one of the most fascinating scientific papers to come out in recent months. This story takes us far above the geopolitics of trade wars and market manipulation, about 12,000 kilometers above, into Earth's magnetosphere, where researchers have published a groundbreaking study on what are called chorus waves.
And I know what some of our viewers might be thinking. What does space physics have to do with a news program about power and surveillance? The answer is more than you'd expect. Chorus waves interact directly with the Van Allen radiation belts, those zones of charged particles trapped by Earth's magnetic field. Understanding these waves isn't just academic curiosity. It has direct implications for satellite operations, communications infrastructure, and the technology that undergirds modern surveillance and military systems.
According to the paper published on AR14, chorus waves are electromagnetic waves that got their name because when you convert their radio frequencies to audio, they sound like birds chirping at dawn. It's an almost poetic description for a phenomenon that has puzzled scientists since the Van Allen radiation belts were first discovered in 1958. The central mystery has been understanding how these waves amplify, how tiny seed waves can grow by a factor of 50 or more as they interact with energetic electrons.
The researchers have proposed what they call the Free-Electron laser model of magnetospheric chorus. Now, a free-electron laser is a device that generates coherent electromagnetic radiation by passing a beam of electrons through a magnetic structure. The key insight of this paper is that the physics governing free-electron lasers in the laboratory can be mapped onto what's happening naturally in Earth's magnetosphere. The energetic electrons spiraling along magnetic field lines behave, in a sense, like the electron beam in a laser.
And this is where it gets genuinely exciting from a scientific standpoint. If this model is correct, it provides a unified theoretical framework for understanding chorus wave generation that connects laboratory physics to space physics. Previous models have struggled to fully account for the rapid amplification and the characteristic rising tone frequency structure of chorus, that chirping sound. The free-electron laser analogy may explain both.
Let's talk about why this matters practically. The Van Allen radiation belts are a hazard to anything we put in space. Satellites passing through these regions are bombarded by high-energy particles that can damage electronics, degrade solar panels, and cause anomalies in onboard systems. Chorus waves play a key role in the dynamics of these belts. They can accelerate electrons to higher energies, making the radiation environment more dangerous, or they can scatter electrons into the atmosphere, depleting the belts.
And here's the connection to the broader themes of our show. Our modern world depends on space infrastructure. GPS satellites, communication satellites, weather satellites, and yes, surveillance satellites all operate in or pass through regions affected by the Van Allen belts. The ability to predict and understand chorus wave activity directly affects our ability to protect this infrastructure. A better model of chorus means better space weather forecasting, which means better protection for the systems modern society relies on.
There's also a military and intelligence dimension that rarely gets discussed in mainstream coverage of space physics. The radiation belts have been studied extensively by defense agencies precisely because of their impact on satellite operations. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union conducted high-altitude nuclear tests that artificially enhanced the radiation belts, damaging satellites. Understanding the natural processes that drive radiation belt dynamics, including chorus waves, is strategically significant.
The paper's contribution is fundamental science, but fundamental science has a way of becoming applied science faster than anyone expects. If the Free-Electron laser model holds up to further testing and observation, it could lead to improved models of the space radiation environment that inform everything from satellite design to launch timing to the operation of space-based intelligence assets.
And consider this, Alex. We're entering an era of dramatically increased activity in space. SpaceX's Starlink constellation alone has thousands of satellites in orbit. Military space programs are expanding globally. As we put more assets in space, the economic and strategic cost of radiation belt disturbances goes up. A single severe space weather event that damages multiple satellite constellations could disrupt communications, navigation, and surveillance capabilities simultaneously.
Which brings us to an uncomfortable truth. Our dependence on space infrastructure creates a vulnerability that most people don't think about. We worry about cyber attacks on power grids. We worry about physical attacks on undersea cables. But the possibility that a natural geophysical process, driven by the very chorus waves this paper describes, could disrupt or degrade a significant portion of our space infrastructure is a risk that deserves more attention from policymakers and the public.
The researchers deserve credit for advancing our understanding of these processes. And the broader scientific community studying space weather deserves more funding and attention. Because protecting our space infrastructure isn't just about convenience. It's about maintaining the systems that modern economies, governments, and militaries depend on every single day.
Now let's step back and connect the threads of tonight's three stories. Because when you lay them side by side, a pattern emerges. In every case, we're looking at systems of power operating behind structures that most people don't fully understand. The legal frameworks governing presidential trade authority. The judicial mechanisms China is deploying to manage market confidence. The electromagnetic processes shaping the space environment our technology depends on.
And in every case, the gap between appearance and reality is significant. The Supreme Court ruling appears to check presidential power on tariffs, but alternative legal pathways remain wide open. China's push for investor lawsuits appears to empower ordinary investors, but operates within a system that ultimately serves the party's interests. And chorus waves appear to be a niche scientific curiosity, but they govern processes that affect the infrastructure undergirding global surveillance and communication.
The common thread is complexity as a form of control. When legal frameworks are so complex that only specialists can navigate them, ordinary citizens lose the ability to hold power accountable. When market regulations operate in a system without genuine judicial independence, the appearance of fairness can mask continued exploitation. When critical infrastructure depends on physical processes most people have never heard of, vulnerabilities go unaddressed.
This is why investigative journalism matters, Alex. Our job is to cut through that complexity and expose the mechanisms. Tonight, we've shown that a Supreme Court ruling celebrated as a check on power actually leaves multiple alternative pathways for the same policy. We've shown that a Chinese judicial reform presented as investor protection is really a tool for market management. And we've highlighted how fundamental physics research connects directly to the security of systems we all depend on.
The question for our audience is always the same. Who benefits? On tariffs, the beneficiaries of legal ambiguity are those with the resources to lobby for favorable outcomes, large corporations and industry groups who can navigate the shifting legal landscape. On Chinese market reforms, the beneficiary is the state itself, which gains credibility with investors while maintaining ultimate control. On space weather research, the primary beneficiaries of better understanding are the military and intelligence agencies that depend most heavily on space infrastructure.
And the losers, in every case, are ordinary people who bear the costs without having a voice in the process. American consumers paying higher prices because of tariff uncertainty. Chinese retail investors whose savings remain vulnerable despite the promise of legal recourse. And all of us whose daily lives depend on satellite infrastructure we can neither see nor protect.
That's the pattern we keep coming back to on this show. Power operates most effectively when it's invisible, when it's buried in legal statutes most people will never read, in judicial announcements in languages most people don't speak, in electromagnetic phenomena most people have never heard of. Making that power visible is the first step toward accountability.
And that's exactly what Truth Report exists to do. We don't just read the headlines. We read the statutes, the court filings, the scientific papers. We follow the money, the legal maneuvering, the strategic calculations. Because the truth isn't usually hidden. It's just buried under layers of complexity that powerful interests count on you not having the time or resources to penetrate.
Before we go, let me leave you with this thought. The Supreme Court ruling on IEEPA, China's judicial push on investor protection, and the Chorus Wave research all share something else in common. They're all about feedback loops. IEEPA allowed emergency powers to feed back into routine trade policy until the court intervened. China's market problems feed back into social stability concerns that feed back into judicial policy. And Chorus waves themselves are literally a feedback process, small waves amplified by resonant interaction until they become powerful enough to reshape the radiation belts.
Understanding feedback loops is understanding how small actions become large consequences. A legal precedent set today shapes executive power for decades. A judicial announcement in Beijing today shapes investor behavior for months. A chorus wave amplified today can accelerate electrons that damage a satellite tomorrow. In every domain, the ability to see and understand these feedback loops is the difference between being a subject of power and being an informed citizen.
That's our show for tonight. I'm Alex Truth. Do your own research. Read the court decisions. Follow the legal analysis. Understand the systems that govern your life. Because knowledge isn't just power. In an era of information warfare and institutional complexity, knowledge is self-defense.
I'm Maya Clarity. Remember, the most dangerous form of ignorance isn't not knowing the facts. It's not knowing the systems that determine which facts reach you and which ones don't. Stay curious, stay critical, and we'll see you next time on Truth Report. Good night.